All right, guys. So Trump's cabinet officials are currently going through the nomination process. And as a part of that process, they have to go before the Senate, which is going to have to confirm them to their positions. And usually they get grilled by the opposing party. Now, the big one from yesterday was this guy, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, who Trump appointed to be his Secretary of Defense. Now, this guy has more baggage than I could possibly fit into one video. We're going to try to get into as much of it here as we can. But just to give you a little bit of background on who this guy is before we watch some of the wild videos from yesterday. So this guy spent a huge portion of his career being a pro-Iraq war advocate. He's also pro-war with Iran, pro-war with North Korea. He's pro-waterboarding and torture. He's also straight up pro-war crime and war criminal, as he pushed Trump successfully to pardon convicted Blackwater war criminals. All right, so that's a little bit of his past there. He also has a whole bunch of other issues when it comes to alleged drinking problems, when it comes to him allegedly cheating on his wives, when it comes to allegations of sexual assault and abuse. So much shit that we need to get into in this video. But just to give you a little bit more background on that, here from CNN, they have this paragraph that sums up a little bit of it. They say Hegseth's position on using the military to put down domestic riots is among a number of controversial policies he has supported in the past, including speaking in favor of enhanced interrogation methods, torture, such as waterboarding, pardoning U.S. soldiers convicted of war crimes, targeting cultural institutions in drone strikes, and banning women from combat roles. We also have here, as pointed out by Midas News, Pete Hegseth defended carpet bombing, blowing up homes, and targeting civilians in a 2016 speech. We also have, in regards to Israel and Gaza in the West Bank, Hegseth has seemed to all but endorse Israel's annexation of the West Bank, saying, quote, "That's why going and visiting Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, it's a critical next step to showing the world that this is the land for Jews and the land of Israel." After all this, it's hardly needs to be said that he also opposes any two-state solution or equality between Israelis and Palestinians on this land. So he's full-blown in favor of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and Israel annexing Palestinian land. They also say that in Hegseth's book in 2020, he exhorts conservatives to undertake, quote, "an American crusade to mock, humiliate, intimidate, and crush our leftist opponents, to attack first in response to a left that he identifies with sedition." And he writes in that book that he lays out the strategy that we must employ in order to defeat America's internal enemies. So pro-war criminal, pro-war crime, including torture, pro-war with Iraq, right? Using the U.S. military against domestic internal enemies, as he describes them, or American leftists. This is the guy who Trump has picked to lead the Department of Defense, right? So now we get into some of the back and forth here. This was him on waterboarding, torture, as well as the Geneva Conventions, which he apparently has some sort of an issue with.
Do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant, is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours. But what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield.
Okay, so this is what in a normal functioning country would be a layup question, right? Are you going to be pro-torture in your role as the head of the U.S. military, right? Are you going to abide by international law or the Geneva Conventions, right? Essentially, are you going to abide by international standards that the U.S. has signed on to, right? That's what we're talking about here. This should not be complicated. This should not be difficult. And by the way, torture isn't just wrong morally speaking in terms of waterboarding. It's also not effective, because guess what happens when you waterboard somebody, when you torture somebody trying to get information out of them? a lot of times they'll tell you whatever they think you want to hear in order for you to stop torturing them. So it actually oftentimes leads to inaccurate information being retrieved from the people you're torturing. Not to mention the whole Guantanamo Bay situation that he was just seemingly defending. Guantanamo Bay being this illegal torture camp, this illegal prison where we have sent people without any due process, without any right to fair trial, and have been torturing people there for decades at this point. So, not exactly off to a great start here, guys. And this, again, should be an easy question. But he continues. Here we have Elizabeth Warren going after Pete Hegseth. She had a couple different lines of questioning that she was levying against him. This is specifically on the issue of essentially the revolving door in DC politics. Now, there's a perfect example of that with the guy who's currently the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, under Biden, because he previously worked at Raytheon, a U.S. defense contractor, right? A company that makes millions, billions of dollars from U.S. government contracts and profits directly off of war. So the question here is pretty simple. You, Pete Hegseth, have previously said that you think that generals should be banned for at least a 10-year period from going and working for defense contracting companies. Would you abide by that standard for yourself? Let's see how he handles this.
Now, Mr. Hegseth, you have written that after they retire, generals should be banned from working for the defense industry for 10 years. You and I agree on the corrosive effects of the revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors. It's something I would have liked to talk to you about if you'd come and been willing to visit with me. But the question I have for you on this is, will you put your money where your mouth is and agree that when you leave this job, you will not work for the defense industry for 10 years?
Senator, it's not even a question I've thought about because
You can
it's
think
not
about it
one
right
that,
now.
It's not one, my motivation for this job
I understand
has never
that. I
been
just
about
need
what
a
could
yes or no
conceivably
here.
come next.
Time is short. I just need a yes or no.
I would consult with the president about what the policy should be
In
at the Defense
other
Department.
words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. But you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. So you're saying sauce for the goose, but certainly not sauce for the gander?
I would want to see what the policy of the
Oh,
president
I'll
is.
bet you would.
Thank you, Senator.
I mean, it's just pathetic, right? I've never seen such a pathetic tap dance around the actual question here. This is, again, a layup, okay? Or should be a layup, especially given that you're somebody who previously has talked about this in regards to the generals and saying they should be banned from going and working, within this revolving door of the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon. This should be an easy question, especially for somebody like you who's advocated for a ban on that. But it's also insane that we even have to be having a conversation about this in the first place. In what reasonable country would something like this be legal in the first place? That you can work at the top of the Pentagon and then turn around and go and work for the military-industrial complex, go and work for a company and make hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars off of a company that directly profits from war, right? It's a direct quid pro quo. They're hiring you because they know you have connections within this military world, within the political world, and could potentially affect their bottom line. That's why you would get that kind of position in the first place. So, shouldn't be a difficult question. He completely fumbles it. And again, this is like standard practice in DC. It's one thing with the defense contractors and everything, but this applies to every single sector you could possibly imagine, right? Especially when it comes to the Trump administration that is bringing in billionaires and top donors into some of these key positions. This is nothing new, but again, pathetic there from Pete Hegseth. Now, we also have this clip here from Tom Cotton, one of our most insane and deranged senators from Arkansas. And he's just checking in to make sure that Pete Hegseth is a committed Zionist. So let's go ahead and watch this clip here.
As was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I'm a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And
Okay, so first off, it's difficult to claim that you're America first, as somebody like Pete Hegseth does, while also saying that you are a committed Christian Zionist. There's a little bit of a contradiction there, because if you are ideologically a Zionist, if you are committed to everything that Israel, the Israeli government, does, you cannot be America first. Because oftentimes, I would say most times, the government of Israel's actions are actually a direct detriment to U.S. strategic goals in the region, around the world. I mean, over the last year and a half of their genocide in Gaza, by supporting them full-throatedly, the U.S. has obliterated our reputation on the international stage. There has been incredible amounts of destabilization within the region that has come as a result of Israel's actions. So, a little bit of a contradiction there between being America first and also being a committed Zionist, meaning you are ideologically committed to a foreign government. But the other aspect to answer Tom Cotton's question in terms of why that's a bad thing is because Zionism is not, oh, I support Jewish people. Zionism is a settler colonial project, okay, that has been happening since the late 1800s, early 1900s, that has directly required and involved the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population that lives there and has lived there generation after generation after generation. It is a violent settler colonial project. That's why it's a bad thing. Not to mention the fact, on top of that, that many Christian Zionists are basically believers in a straight up like end times death cult philosophy, where they believe that Israel needs to be in control of the entire region, right, in order for Jesus to come back, bring about the end of the world. Everybody on earth is going to die, and a select few will get to go back up to heaven as Jesus fights this war with the devil, okay? They are straight up end times death cult believers. Somebody like Mike Huckabee is a perfect example of that. Somebody else who Trump is bringing in as a key partner in his administration. So, number of different reasons why identifying yourself as an aggressive Christian Zionist may be a problem. Now, we move on. Here we have another senator, Hirono, who is asking about his former comments in regards to Trump suggesting that the U.S. military should be using lethal force, or I guess sub-lethal force, by shooting protesters in the legs. Okay? Now here we have Pete Hegseth's answer on that.
Second Lieutenant, I have sworn.
Correct?
Senator, on multiple occasions, including as a young second lieutenant, I have sworn an oath to the
Answer is
Constitution,
yes.
and I'm proud to do so. Yes, ma'am.
In June of 2020, then President Trump directed former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper to shoot protesters in the legs in downtown D.C., an order Secretary Esper refused to comply with. Would you carry out such an order from President Trump?
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard unit that was in Lafayette Square during those
Would you
events,
carry
holding
out
a
an
riot
order to
shield on
shoot
behalf of my
protesters
country.
in the legs?
I saw 50
as
Secret
directed
Service agents
to
get injured
Secretary
by
Esper?
rioters trying to jump over the fence, set
Again,
the church on fire, and destroy
You know
a
what, that
statue.
sounds to me that you will
Chaos.
comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the leg.
Yeah, I mean, if he wasn't willing to comply with that kind of an order, he could have just said it there. He had every opportunity to say, no, I will not, deploy the U.S. military to go and shoot American protesters. He just had the opportunity to answer that question, and he declined to do so. He instead was focusing on, the protesters were being violent, so I guess it's okay then that we deploy the U.S. military on the streets of the U.S. to shoot Americans. This is where we're at as a country, guys. Now, couple more here. This one was just kind of embarrassing for him. He was asked by Senator Tammy Duckworth about the ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, I believe is what this acronym stands for. And it was basically a gotcha question that he was asked here. He failed on the gotcha question and was asked about what countries are in this alliance. And he said South Korea, Japan, and Australia, none of which are in the alliance. But here goes Pete Hegseth on this.
Not qualified to that. You could do acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, which essentially are security agreements. You can't even mention that. You've done none of those. You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact
No, you
amount of
couldn't,
nations
because
in
you're
that,
not
but I
even
know we have
bothered to do-
allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work
Okay.
on submarines with them.
Mr.
and data
Hegseth,
transfers
none
with
of those
them.
countries
We
are
have
in
allies
ASEAN.
across.
None of those 3 countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a gotcha question, but it's also a gotcha question that the incoming Secretary of Defense should probably be aware of, right? Now, the countries that he listed here, as she pointed out there, South Korea, Japan, and Australia, are not in ASEAN. There are countries like Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and Indonesia, I believe, that are in this specific group. But again, just kind of embarrassing for him there that he couldn't do the bare minimum of the homework required for this kind of a position. Now, I'll finish off with this. Here we have Tim Kaine pressing him on some more of his personal things, less policy focused here, but kind of calling him a piece of shit directly to his face for his previous treatment of his wives and his family and the cheating scandals and all of that. So let's go ahead and watch this real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talk. I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct?
I believe so.
And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged,
Hey,
fully
you-
investigated and completely cleared.
So you think you were completely cleared because you committed no crime? That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is
Senator-
that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she
I'm
was,
glad
and
she's here.
you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
It
no,
was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I'm so
You've
grateful
you've
for the marriage
admitted-
I have to this
No,
amazing woman behind me.
you've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything,
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
How do you explain your
completely
judgment?
false charges against me.
You
Fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault,
Okay. So he goes on to completely dodge the question there. Basically, his main line, he sort of took the Trump approach and was like, this is fake news, media, smears, lies against me anytime something like this was brought up. But as Tim Kaine was pointing out there accurately, the cheating aspect of this, not the sexual assault aspect of this, but the cheating aspect of this is something he's openly admitted before. So I don't even know why he's denying it as if that's a false smear. It's something that he's previously talked about before. So, I mean, this was more so focused on, and a lot of this, almost frustratingly, was focused more on, a lot of this hearing was focused more on the personal stuff like this, like the drinking problems and the cheating on his wives and, the sexual assault. All of that is serious and should be talked about. But I do wish that there was more focus on some of the other stuff that I brought in here, right? Like the actual relevant policy discussions for the position that he's about to take up, right? I mean, it's a problem that this guy was a pro-Iraq war advocate. It's a problem that this guy was advocating for bombing Iranian cultural sites, right? It's a problem that this guy is pro-waterboarding. He's pro-torture, okay? And he's pro-Guantanamo Bay, apparently, as well, right? It's a problem that this guy is a Christian Zionist who fully supports Israel annexing the West Bank. And I wish that there was more focus on that kind of stuff. I think that outweighs a lot of this other stuff about him cheating on his wife, which is obviously, he seems like kind of a piece of shit. But, the policy stuff I wish was more focused on. But anyways, I mean, that's basically a summation of how all of this went. This is just one of the first major confirmation hearings that we've gotten. I believe today was Marco Rubio, so I'll probably do a video tomorrow focusing on that. But this is what the next couple of days is going to be like, right? These are the kinds of people who Trump is appointing to his cabinet. By the way, great anti-war cabinet that Trump is building up here, filled with open, aggressive Zionists and war hawks and neocons and everything like that. Great anti-war cabinet that we're putting together here. I mean, that was obviously bullshit from the beginning, but Pete Hegseth is I think a great example of, what we can expect from the incoming Trump administration. And it's not great, to say the least.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying